EASD guidelines are always eagerly anticipated, and this year there are some new guidelines, and to talk us through those guidelines I have Professor Russing. Professor Russing, you were a member of the writing group, so you've been absolutely in there with writing these guidelines. First of all, tell us, how important are these guidelines?
I think they're very important because it's a change in the way guidelines have been or the recommendations given by guidelines compared to previous guidelines. And I think what the EASD and ADA goes together and agrees about is important for a lot of practicing physicians and thereby also for a lot of patients.
So tell me, where are the main points of difference between these guidelines and the last ones, which were in 2015. So 3 years ago. Tell me what the main points of difference are.
I'd say the main difference is we had a lot of very important large cardiovascular outcome studies since 2015. So in 2015 there was a focus that we should individualize targets for patients. Now there is an opportunity of individualizing the selection of treatment for individual patients based on existing comorbidities like cardiovascular disease, heart failure, ischemic heart disease, or kidney disease. So if you have some of these conditions, we know that there are now drugs that should be preferred as second-line drugs after metformin. And that's new, and that's changed a lot compared to previous guidelines, where after metformin you could choose more or less freely among all the available agents.
Now there also seems to be much more emphasis on lifestyle.
Yeah. I think it's very important for these guidelines. We have put more emphasis on self-management, on lifestyle, including weight management and also physical activity compared to previous guidelines.
Anything else that you want to highlight from the guidelines?
Well, I think given the outcome of the previous cardiovascular outcome studies, it's not a surprise that we can now pinpoint two agents that have really provided good data. Not only they are safe, but they actually reduce cardiovascular outcome in patients. And that is the major killer of patients with type 2 diabetes. It's important to be able to pinpoint when to use the agents in these patients.
Now, there will be criticism and indeed concern from many countries with lower incomes about the cost of these guidelines, of implementing them, because some of them are really quite expensive drugs.
Yeah, that's a very unfortunate issue that, of course, we can't handle, that there's a difference in availability of drugs and also in cost of drugs. There's a focus in the guidelines on cost. What should you prefer if cost is a major issue? And therefore, obviously, there are choices that are very important to make, and you can recommend good diabetes treatment even with quite cheap drugs. But there are better options if they are available to you, and that we also need to take into account. So I think that the inequality in health is a big issue. We cannot solve that, but we can pinpoint that if cost is a major issue, there are good alternatives as well.
And of course, the health economics of treating with the right medicine means that you're avoiding a lot of additional costs for hospitalization, all of those kind of things.
And obviously that's a good argument, but it's a long-term argument, and often in politics you are looking at short-term costs or gains, whereas it may take a while to catch up these benefits of improving health. But overall, we expect that if you can reduce cardiovascular outcome, that would lead to less morbidity, less hospitalization, and thereby less cost.
And finally, who should be reading these guidelines? Who should be really taking them to heart?
Well, hopefully, I think clinicians caring for persons with type 2 diabetes should be interested in these guidelines, because they would be relevant to all of us, clinicians, yeah.
But also perhaps for patients too.
Definitely, and I think that's a way, I think in the future we should involve patients as well in writing our guidelines. That was not the fact this time, but I think going forward that would be the way to go.
Thank you very much indeed. And you can find those guidelines on easd.org.